Hello, and welcome to this exciting episode on the adventures of prosecuting your political opponents under the Espionage Act, because that's what we have here. Now, some people may think that the current prosecution of President Trump under the Espionage Act is a new development, something that is unique to the Obama Biden administration. No, perish the thought. This is why the Espionage Act was created in the first place. The Espionage Act dates back to the year 1917, but really it dates back a number of years earlier to 1915. President Woodrow Wilson is claiming to keep America out of the war. In practice, though, not so much. And President Woodrow Wilson comes to Congress in his annual message, and he asks for legislation that will enable him to go after the people who are subverting America. And Congress gives him part of what he asks for. What Woodrow Wilson is actually asking for is even bigger. He wants the power to censor the press. Congress says no on censoring the press. They do give him the power to censor the mails, and they eventually give him the Espionage Act. What the Espionage Act is used to do is to suppress largely political opponents. Most of those are on the left, but not always. They go after socialists. They go after a guy named Robert Goldstein, who is a German Jewish immigrant who makes a film called The Spirit of 1776, Spirit of 76, actually. That movie depicts the British committing horrifying atrocities, things that never actually happened, kind of like a bad Mel Gibson movie, or an even worse Mel Gibson movie. And he actually ends up being tried under the Espionage Act and deported for making that movie. A number of others are also tried under the Espionage Act for largely being political opponents. They're opposed to the draft. The leadership of the Watchtower Society, whose members are pacifists, are also tried and actually imprisoned under the Espionage Act. After World War One, after World War Two, the Espionage Act kind of takes a somewhat of a breather. During the Cold War, the Espionage Act prosecutions are mostly legitimate. The left would obviously disagree, but they are largely legitimate. People like the Rosenberg atom bomb spies, who actually are engaged in espionage. But the Espionage Act, which has been lying fallow for the most part until the arrival of Obama, gets a new boost under Obama. And Obama has a bright idea for what to do with this piece of legislation it's just lying around there, called the Espionage Act. And you know what Barack Obama decides to do? There are whistleblowers that are leaking things about foreign policy, in particular, to people in the media. And the Espionage Act is used to go after reporters and whistleblowers and assorted leakers, most notably Fox News journalist James Rosen, who was targeted under the Espionage Act. Now, the media initially puts up a bit of a fuss. It says, "How dare you? No, this is completely unacceptable." And then the media, of course, comes around because Barack Obama is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He is the Messiah. He's the avatar of hope and change. And Obama gets away with it. And having gotten away with using Espionage Act, especially national security tools against political opponents, just even not even political opponents, but people who are causing some kind of problems for his administration, do you know what Obama does next? Well, that's where Russiagate comes from. Actually, he does a number of things in between that, including targeting people who are pro Israel during the debate over the Iran nuclear deal. But the bottom line is from there, Obama goes on to target political opponents literally with Russiagate, with investigating President Trump, or then candidate Trump and his various political allies. This is, of course, a game changer, but it's a game changer that continues because once you open the Overton window, it's a whole lot harder to close the Overton window. And that's what we have here. So now, fast forward to today, when Clinton special counsel, I should say, he was a longtime Clinton ally, indicts President Trump under the Espionage Act. And people are saying this is an abuse of the Espionage Act. Well, arguably, this is what the Espionage Act was intended to do. Now, let's actually flash back and see some of the parallels between Joe Biden and Woodrow Wilson. One of those parallels is really, really compelling because what happens to Woodrow Wilson is that he suffers a medical crisis. He has a stroke. He is effectively incapacitated. Who's running the country? Not the vice president. Mrs. Woodrow Wilson is running the country at the time. Papers, materials directed, aimed to the president actually are going to her. It's kind of like a monarchy at that point where the king is down, so the queen is actually making the decisions. In this case, Queen Wilson was the one who was actually in charge of America. People were saying that Hillary Clinton would be the first president, first female president. She would, or no, the first female presidential spouse. No, that would be Mrs. Wilson, would have been the first one. But there's something else going on there. There's a lot of psychodrama with Woodrow Wilson, who was arguably the first socialist president. But there's a whole other drama going on there, which is that Woodrow Wilson, like Joe Biden, has something to cover up. He's resorting to the Espionage Act likely because he's trying to keep a certain scandal from going public. Joe Biden's scandal was involved China, Hunter Biden, all this stuff, which they tried to claim was really foreign election interference. Woodrow Wilson is worried about another scandal because he's been carrying on an affair with another woman. And there's been a whole, because this is, of course, the early 20th century, there are a whole lot of letters, printed letters, that are going back and forth between them, very impassioned letters. And Republicans initially choose not to use it. Theodore Roosevelt very famously says, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here, that no amount of evidence would convince the American people that a store clerk like Woodrow Wilson was actually playing a Romeo. In case that's confusing, President Roosevelt is saying that Woodrow Wilson does not look like the kind of man who's going to be having an affair. Nobody's going to believe that he's writing these impassioned letters, so there's no point in even using them. But some Republicans are not so finicky about it. They're actually proposing to pay one of the women at the center of this, I think $300,000, which was an incredible fortune. That would be millions of dollars today for these letters. Mrs. Wilson, of course, is privy to this whole thing, and Woodrow Wilson at one point even drafts the statement stating that basically I had bad judgment. So the Clinton scandal was not new to the Democrats. Anyway, Woodrow Wilson is very likely worried about this getting out, giving him the power to censor the mails, and oh boy, censor the press would have been a very good way of covering up the scandal. So Biden has two things in common with Woodrow Wilson. One, they're both incapacitated, except the 25th Amendment did not exist during the Wilson era. It does exist under Biden. And the second thing is that both of them use national security to cover up a personal scandal. So the Espionage Act has a long, dirty history of being used in exactly this way. Most Americans do not know this, but DC, Washington, D.C. insiders, people who have a sense of the history of the institutions involved, do know how this works. So there's actually nothing surprising. This is a continuation of an unfortunate and ugly history, one that needs to be changed before the Republic is completely shattered. Thank you for listening to this episode documenting the incredible adventures of prosecuting your political opponents under the Espionage Act. Have a great weekend.